One of the challenges in the investigation was the uncooperative witnesses. One of those was Dr. Murray's girlfriend. When we finally served the search warrant at her apartment, the whole place had been cleaned out. There was nothing to show that Dr. Murray had been there, stayed there, frequented there at all. Fortunately, they had missed behind one of the bookcases. Behind one of the bookcases, we found a receipt for a pharmacy. That led us to the propofol. These items here are what we found at Nicole Alvarez's house. So it brings me back to remembering how difficult things were when dealing with her. This business card and this receipt were the only things in his name at her place. This led us to the pharmacy. When we arrived at the pharmacy had all the records ready. They had been following the news and they knew that the police would be there eventually. And as you go through, you can see all the amounts. One case of the 100 milliliter bottles, one case of the 20 milliliter bottles. In June, 4 cases of the 100 milliliter bottles. All of the amounts, it's over 5 gallons worth of propofol.
A massive amount of propofol, a massive amount of propofol was shipped to his girlfriend's house.
We found that there was other doctors that Michael had reached out to in hopes of being administered propofol, and he was turned down.
That relationship was a perfect storm. Michael first got introduced to propofol through a dental procedure, and he liked it. He felt like, wow, this is the best way to go to sleep.
That was his drug of choice, and he was looking for doctors that would administer that, you know, as wrong as it was.
Usually you think of a doctor as someone very successful and ethical and distinguished. Why they would risk a patient's life for anything. What would make it worth it?
We done search warrants out in Las Vegas at his residence, as well as his place of business in Las Vegas, and then his office out in Houston, Texas.
We get into finances, we get into business dealings, and his relationships.
We executed a search warrant at the Armstrong Medical Clinic this morning with members from the DEA and the Houston Police Department, and we are from LAPD Robbery Homicide Division.
He had several children. We would learn several of them by several different wives.
He would go out to places of adult entertainment and spend outrageous amounts of money. He would put on a show and not be able to support it financially. He would leverage his closeness to a celebrity to manipulate young women into relationships with him.
We knew that he had purchased a home in October in Las Vegas for over $1 million, and his mortgage was $10,000 a month. And he had stopped paying it.
He had censures from different states where he practiced medicine. With these different medical boards, they sent us the files of the complaints and the penalties that they would impose on Dr. Murray when he would violate their rules. We saw a pattern of sloppy behavior.
A private physician to Michael Jackson, and here he is, just an absolute mess, you know? Yeah, surprising.
This is what I recovered from his car, from the doctor's car. This was the contract as we first found it. The agreement between Dr. Murray, AEG, and Mr. Jackson. The producer shall remit payment to Dr. Murray in the amount of $150,000 per month. So this is where the money came into it.
Michael started working, preparing for this huge comeback tour, and that's when he had reached out, Michael, and told AEG that he wanted Conrad Murray with him. And initially AEG's like, you know, London's not a third world country. They have fabulous doctors over there. What do you need your own physician for?
And Michael's response to his managers were, listen, the President of the United States has a physician, travel with him. I want a physician to travel with me.
Dr. Murray agreed to go ahead and accompany him and provide Michael with what he wanted.
So he needed this gig with Mr. Jackson either to pay off or to keep up with his debts.
He had the right motive. He needed money.
Ultimately, the decision was made to charge Dr. Murray with involuntary manslaughter as opposed to second-degree murder.
The DA's office didn't want another high-profile failure. It was an election year for the district attorney. I think it was I don't want to say the lazy way out, but again, a manslaughter charge was, you know, the path of least resistance.
The family wasn't happy with it at all. Mrs. Jackson was just beside herself that there wasn't going to be a second-degree murder filed.
We felt the evidence suggests that it was a second degree.
The level of his negligence was just so clear that we thought that it would apply. We do not charge people. We investigate the case and we present it. We were not happy with the choice, but we deal with what we can and we move forward.
What I felt a little pressure, I guess, is when it came time to arrest Dr. Murray.
We wanted to see Murray in handcuffs, and I think a lot of, people wanted to see him in handcuffs.
His attorneys didn't want Dr. Murray to be seen in handcuffs in public, because that's not good for his image, and neither is killing somebody, but
behind our backs, the DA's office made that agreement with Dr. Murray's attorneys.
the doctor turned himself in, voluntarily surrendered. You know, I'm of the opinion that regardless of who you are or what walk of life you come from, if you've done wrong, then you need to answer for that.
I am an innocent man. I therefore plead not guilty.
Again, he feels he'd done nothing wrong. It wasn't his fault. He's an arrogant individual.
Conrad Murray figuratively and literally abandoned Michael Jackson.
We looked at Murray's phone records. That was a big, huge piece. We could see Murray on his phone at certain times.
He left this vulnerable man filled with Valium and midazolam and lorazepam and propofol with no medical monitoring equipment no necessary resuscitative equipment. He left him there, abandoned him to fend for himself.
So as far as stepping away for a minute and going to the bathroom and coming back and, oh my gosh, Michael's dead, no.
He was sending emails, reviewing a contract, and he was also on the telephone with various people. While he was on the phone, he realized that Mr. Jackson was not breathing.
I heard mumbling of voices. It sounded like the phone was maybe in his pocket or something. It was shh, and I heard coughing.
We looked at the timelines of when the 911 call was, I think, around 20 to 25 minutes after that call with Sade ending.
Mr. Murray started cleaning up the mess that he had left, covering up the medical treatment that he was giving, put that away, called for help from security, directed them to call 911 while he gave ineffective one-handed CPR, and then traveled to the hospital with Mr. Jackson. Dr. Murray fled the hospital before we arrived, waited a couple days to get his story straight, and ultimately was prosecuted for his conduct.
We, the jury in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Conrad Robert Murray, guilty of the crime of involuntary manslaughter.
That's how that turned out. Should it have been a second-degree murder? Yeah, I think it could have been.
Unfortunately, that is not a choice that we were able to make.
The biggest thing is that he does not get his medical license back in any state, and I personally don't see that happening. And I'm just trying to keep it light and polite here. But yeah, he's in his own world. He's in his own world, Dr. Murray.
I think that this case, we actually have the answers. We won't be in that book of unsolved murders, all the big ones where we failed. At least my name won't be put in the same place as those.
It's something I'll never forget, obviously, the rest of my life. One hell of an experience. Yeah, no regrets.
In big cases like this, sometimes, friendships can really dissolve. But not in this case. It was, we all lived happily ever after.
As soon as this one was over, it comes to, this is what we expect of you. You get your next murder and you move forward. About 4 years after the trial, I was driving home from work. I look over to my left and I see this green, older, nice Mercedes. I feel someone staring at me. I look over in the same car and I see Dr. Murray. It took me a few seconds to register that it was him. And by that time, our cars had separated. But I never saw any double takes or any instant moment of recognition. At that time, I wondered whether or not he would start practicing medicine again. Do you give someone like that a second chance? Someone who's done their time for the crime that they've committed. When do you
It was weeks went by, and we kept asking, when are we going to hear from toxicology? When are we going to hear?
We had a death, but we didn't have a criminal death yet.